The sound of breaking glass shattered the stillness of the spring morning, followed immediately by the high-pitched wail of a child. Clara Foster clutched her 2-year-old son tightly against her chest, watching helplessly as egg yolk and broken shells dripped down her storefront window. Through the streaks, she could make out Thaddeus Morgan's sneering face before he disappeared down the dusty main street of Lincoln, Nebraska territory. "Hush now, Henry," she whispered, stroking her son's dark curls. "They're just mean folks with nothing better to do." But her words did little to calm the frightened toddler, whose tears soaked through her worn calico dress. It was 1859, and Lincoln was still finding its footing as a settlement. Clara had arrived almost 3 years ago, full of hope, and carrying the child of a man who'd promised her marriage before disappearing westward for California gold. Her small dress shop had been her salvation, the only way she could provide for herself and her fatherless son in a town that seemed determined to punish her for her disgrace. Henry's sobs finally quieted to hiccups as Clara surveyed the damage. The window wasn't broken. Thank goodness, just another mess to clean before customers arrived, if any would come today. Fewer and fewer did lately, as the whispers about her had grown louder, the town's disapproval more open. "Wait here, sweet one," she murmured, setting Henry on the small pallet behind the counter where he often napped. She gathered a rag and bucket from the back room, her shoulders sagging with the weight of yet another morning begun in humiliation. The bell above her door jingled as she returned to the front of the shop. Clara froze, bucket in hand, expecting more trouble. Instead, a tall man she didn't recognize stood framed in the doorway, his broad shoulders blocking the morning light. He removed his hat, revealing sun-streaked hair that fell just past his collar. Dust coated his denim pants and woolen coat. A traveler then, not a local. "Madam," he said, his voice as deep as it was gentle. "I saw what happened, thought you might want some help." His eyes, the clear blue of a winter sky, took in the mess, then met hers directly, something few men in Lincoln would do anymore. Clara straightened, her pride stinging. "I can manage, sir, thank you." The stranger nodded, respect in his gaze where she'd expected judgment. "Name's Vincent Blackburn, just arrived from Kansas." He gestured to the window. "No lady should have to clean up after such poor behavior." "I'm used to it," Clara replied, immediately regretting how defeated she sounded. Vincent stepped forward, seemingly about to speak again when Henry peeked around the counter, curiosity overcoming his earlier fear. "Mama," the child called, his small hand reaching for her skirts. Clara tensed, waiting for the familiar look of disapproval to cross Vincent Blackburn's face. Instead, he crouched down to Henry's eye level, offering a smile. "Hello there, young man," he said. "That's quite a fine hat you've got." Henry's hand went to the small cloth cap Clara had fashioned for him. "Mine," he said proudly. "Indeed it is," Vincent agreed solemnly. Then, rising to his feet, he reached into his satchel and pulled out a small wrapped package. "I stopped at the baker's before I saw the commotion. Was saving this for later, but perhaps you and your mama might enjoy some fresh bread for breakfast." The simple kindness offered without hesitation, without judgment, nearly undid Clara completely. She blinked rapidly to clear the sudden moisture from her eyes. "That's very kind, Mr. Blackburn, but Vincent, please." He placed the package on the counter. "And it's just bread, madam." "Nothing that needs repaying." Clara studied him, searching for ulterior motives but finding only sincerity in his weathered face. He wasn't young, maybe 35 to her 24, but his eyes held a youthful kindness that seemed out of place in this harsh frontier town. "Clara Foster," she finally said, offering her name as a small token of trust. "And this is Henry." Vincent nodded, placing his hat back on his head. "A pleasure to meet you both. I'll be staying over at Mrs. Reynolds' boarding house for a while, looking for work. If those boys give you any more trouble." He let the offer hang in the air. "Thank you," Clara said softly, meaning it for more than just the bread. After Vincent left, Clara cleaned the window while Henry sat happily on the floor, tearing small pieces from the fresh loaf. The bread was still warm, filling the shop with its comforting aroma. For the first time in months, she felt something other than dread about the day ahead. What she couldn't know was how Vincent Blackburn's simple act of kindness would change everything. 3 days passed before Clara saw Vincent again. The town had been alive with whispers about the newcomer, a cowboy who'd driven cattle up from Kansas, now looking to settle somewhere more permanent. Clara had heard the gossip from Mrs. Turner, one of her few remaining customers, who came in for a dress fitting despite her husband's disapproval. "They say he punched Thaddeus Morgan right in the mouth yesterday," Mrs. Turner had said, eyes wide with scandal and delight. "Called him a disgrace to decent men everywhere." Clara had merely nodded, keeping her thoughts to herself as she pinned the woman's hem. She didn't dare hope that Vincent's defense had anything to do with her. It was late afternoon when the shop door opened, the bell announcing a visitor just as Clara was preparing to close for the day. Henry was cranky from being confined all day, drawing on scraps of paper at her feet as she finished mending a shirt for one of the few men in town who still brought her business. Vincent filled the doorway, hat in hand, looking uncertain for the first time since she'd met him. "Miss Foster," he greeted her, "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," she replied, setting aside her sewing. "Henry, look who's come to visit." The boy looked up, his face brightening with recognition. "Hat man," Vincent laughed, a rich sound that warmed the shop better than any stove. "That's right, young fellow." He approached the counter, placing a small paper sack beside Clara's workbasket. "Mrs. Reynolds baked cookies today. Thought Henry might enjoy them." Clara's breath caught. Not once in the 2 years since Henry's birth had anyone in town brought him a gift. "Mr. Blackburn, Vincent, you don't have to, I know," he interrupted gently. "I wanted to." He glanced around the shop, taking in the half-empty shelves and sparse inventory. "How long have you been in Lincoln, Miss Foster?" "Almost 3 years," she answered, watching as Henry peered eagerly into the sack of cookies. "I came west with my father, but he passed on our first winter here. Pneumonia." She didn't mention Aaron, the smooth-talking cattle driver who'd promised her the world, then left her with nothing but a growing belly and a ruined reputation. Vincent's eyes held understanding anyway, as if he could read the gaps in her story. "It's not an easy life out here for anyone," he said. "Less so for a woman alone." He hesitated. "I heard about the trouble with Morgan and his friends. It won't happen again." Clara's eyes widened. "What did you do?" A slight smile crossed Vincent's face. "Let's just say I explained the impropriety of harassing a lady and her child." Some men need reminding of their manners. The thought of someone defending her honor after so long made Clara's throat tighten with emotion. "Most folks around here don't consider me much of a lady anymore," she said quietly, keeping her voice steady for Henry's sake. Vincent's expression hardened. "Then most folks around here aren't worth listening to." His voice softened as he added, "A mistake doesn't define a person's worth, Miss Foster. Anyone who thinks otherwise has likely never made one themselves." Clara looked down, unable to meet the kindness in his eyes. "Thank you for the cookies," she said, changing the subject. "Henry doesn't get many treats." Vincent nodded, accepting her retreat. "I've taken work at the livery stable," he told her. "Not what I'm used to, but it'll do for now." He settled his hat back on his head. "May I call again sometime? Perhaps bring some more bread?" The request was so simply stated, so devoid of hidden meaning that Clara found herself nodding before she could think better of it. "Yes," she said softly. "We'd like that." As winter approached, Vincent Blackburn became a regular visitor at Clara's small dress shop. Twice a week, like clockwork, he would appear with some small offering fresh bread, apples from the orchard outside town, once even a small wooden horse he'd carved himself for Henry. The child, normally shy around strangers, had taken to Vincent immediately, running to the door whenever he heard the man's footsteps on the boardwalk outside. The townsfolk noticed, of course. Lincoln was too small for anything to go unobserved. Clara heard the whispers as she walked to the general store, saw the knowing looks exchanged when Vincent tipped his hat to her on the street. But for the first time since Henry's birth, the gossip held a different note: curiosity rather than condemnation. Vincent's presence had somehow granted her a measure of protection. Thaddeus Morgan and his friends kept their distance now. More customers had begun returning to her shop, if cautiously. Even Reverend Hollister had nodded to her last Sunday, the first acknowledgement she'd received at church in over 2 years. It was a Wednesday evening in early November when Vincent's visit changed everything. The first snow of the season had begun falling, delicate flakes swirling in the twilight as he knocked on Clara's door. She lived in the rooms above her shop, a small but tidy apartment that few people ever saw. "I brought stew," he called through the door. "From Mrs. Reynolds. She made too much." Clara opened the door, surprised to find him balancing a large covered pot in his arms. "You'll freeze standing out there," she said, ushering him inside. "Henry's already asleep." Vincent looked momentarily disappointed not to see the boy, then smiled as he placed the pot on her small stove. "More for us, then." They ate together at Clara's tiny table, the rich stew warming them against the chill seeping through the windows. Vincent spoke of his day at the livery, the plans to expand the stable come spring, the letter he'd received from his brother back in Kansas. Clara found herself relaxing in his company, sharing stories of her own customers, even laughing at his impression of the pompous bank manager who'd ordered a vest the previous week. As she cleared their bowls, Vincent grew quiet, watching her with an intensity that made her hands tremble slightly. "Clara," he said finally, using her given name as he rarely did. "May I ask you something?" She nodded, suddenly unable to speak. "The boy's father," he began carefully. "Is he?" "Gone," Clara finished for him. "He was a cattle driver passing through. Full of promises about California and the life we'd have once he struck it rich." She swallowed hard. "By the time I realized I was carrying Henry, he was long gone." Vincent's jaw tightened. "And he's never tried to find you, to help with his son." Clara shook her head. "He probably doesn't even know Henry exists, and it's better that way." She squared her shoulders. "We manage just fine." "Yes," Vincent agreed softly. "You do. You're the strongest woman I've ever known." Clara Foster. The compliment, so genuine, so unexpected, caught her off guard. "Most would say foolish, not strong." Vincent stood, moving closer until he was standing before her. Gently, he took her hands in his. "Then most are blind as well as stupid," he said, the blunt words softened by the tenderness in his voice. "I've known many women, Clara. Mothers, sisters, wives of friends. Not one of them could have built what you have all on their own with a town set against them." Clara felt heat rising in her cheeks, unaccustomed to praise. "Why are you here, Vincent? Really?" His thumbs traced circles on her palms. "Because from the moment I saw you cleaning that window, dignity intact despite everything, I knew you were someone special." He smiled ruefully. "And because Henry reminds me of myself at that age, curious, bright, in need of someone to show him how a man ought to behave." Clara's heart began to beat faster. "What are you saying?" Vincent took a deep breath. "I'm saying I'd like to court you properly, Clara, if you'll allow it." She pulled her hands away, shock and confusion washing over her. "You can't mean that. You're new here, you don't understand what it would mean for you." The way people would talk. Let them talk, Vincent said firmly. I've never much cared for other people's opinions. It's different for men, Clara insisted. Your reputation is my own to risk, he finished. And I don't consider loving you and Henry a risk at all. Loving. The word hung between them, enormous and fragile all at once. Clara turned away, overwhelmed by the emotion threatening to choke her. You barely know me, she whispered. Vincent gently turned her back to face him. I know enough, he said. I know you work your fingers raw to provide for your son. I know you hold your head high despite the cruelty of this town. I know you have the prettiest smile I've ever seen, though you don't show it nearly enough. His voice dropped lower. And I know I think about you every waking moment and most of the sleeping ones too. Clara's eyes filled with tears she couldn't control. I can't ask you to take on another man's child, she said, making one last attempt to give him an escape. You're not asking. I'm offering. Vincent lifted a hand to her cheek, wiping away a tear with his thumb. Besides, any fool can father a child. It takes a man to be a daddy. Clara closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. How long had it been since anyone had touched her with tenderness? Not since before Henry, certainly. She'd forgotten the comfort of it, the strength that could be found in another's gentle hands. Say yes, Clara, Vincent murmured. Let me court you properly. Let me bring you and Henry more than just bread and cookies. When she opened her eyes, he was watching her with such hope that her last defenses crumbled. Yes, she whispered, and was rewarded with a smile that outshone the lamplight. The courtship of Clara Foster was the talk of Lincoln that winter. Vincent made no secret of his intentions, accompanying her to church each Sunday. Henry proudly perched on his shoulders. He built shelves in her shop, fixed the loose boards in her stairs, and brought firewood every other day to keep her rooms warm against the Nebraska winter. Many disapproved, of course. Mrs. Hollister, the Reverend's wife, made a point of gathering her skirts when Clara passed, as if sin itself might be contagious. But others, seeing Vincent's steadfast devotion, began to soften. Mrs. Reynolds started inviting Clara for tea. The butcher's wife ordered a new dress. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Clara's place in the community began to shift. For Henry, the change was more dramatic. The boy blossomed under Vincent's attention, following the tall cowboy everywhere, mimicking his walk, his mannerisms, even the way he drank his coffee. Vincent taught him to whittle with a dull knife, to recognize different horses by their markings, to make a proper knot. By Christmas, Henry had taken to calling him Vin, unable to manage the full name but determined to claim this man who had become central to his world. Christmas Eve brought a blizzard that howled through Lincoln streets, piling snowdrifts against buildings and turning the town into a landscape of white. Vincent arrived at Clara's rooms early, concerned about them weathering the storm alone. The liveries closed, nothing moving in this weather, he explained, stomping snow from his boots. Thought you might need help keeping the fire going. Clara welcomed him gratefully. The wind had found every crack in her old building, and despite her best efforts, the rooms were chilly. Henry, excited by the storm and Vincent's unexpected visit, raced around the apartment pretending to be a wild horse. Slow down, buckaroo, Vincent laughed, catching the boy mid-gallop. Save some energy for Santa Claus tonight. Henry's eyes widened. Santa coming. In the snow. Santa's not afraid of a little snow, Vincent assured him, winking at Clara over the boy's head. But he might pass right by if a certain young man doesn't get some sleep. It took 3 stories and 2 glasses of water, but eventually Henry succumbed to slumber. Clara tucked the quilt around him, then rejoined Vincent by the fire. He's finally asleep, she said, accepting the cup of tea Vincent offered. Though I suspect he'll be up with the dawn, storm or no storm. Vincent smiled, the firelight highlighting the laugh lines around his eyes. At 36, he was 12 years her senior, but Clara had never been bothered by the difference. His extra years had given him a steadiness she found comforting. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his coat pocket. "Wanted to give it to you without little eyes watching." He handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper and twine. Clara unwrapped it carefully to reveal a leather-bound book of poetry, Tennyson, her favorite. "Vincent," she breathed, tracing the embossed cover with her fingers. "How did you know?" "You mentioned once that your father used to read Tennyson to you," he said. "Thought you might like to have some poetry of your own." Clara opened the book, flipping through pages of beautiful verse. A slip of paper fell into her lap, a letter, written in Vincent's steady hand. "Read it," he urged quietly. "Please." Clara unfolded the paper, her heart racing as she began to read. "My dearest Clara, words have never come easily to me, but I'll do my best to tell you what's in my heart. Before I came to Lincoln, I was just drifting, moving from place to place, never staying long enough to put down roots. Then I saw you that morning, facing the world's cruelty with more dignity than most show in a lifetime of ease. I didn't believe in love at first sight until that moment. Now I can't imagine a life that doesn't have you and Henry in it. You've given me a purpose, a home that has nothing to do with buildings and everything to do with belonging. I know your trust has been broken before. I know promises mean little coming from a man. So I won't ask you to believe my words. I'll spend every day showing you instead. If you'll have me, I want to build a life with you. I want to be a father to Henry and perhaps more children someday if God blesses us. I want to stand beside you through whatever comes, good or ill. I love you, Clara Foster, simply, completely, and forever. Yours always, Vincent." Clara's vision blurred with tears as she finished reading. Vincent had moved to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "I meant every word," he said softly. "I love you, Clara. And I love that boy in there as if he were my own flesh and blood." He reached into his pocket again, this time withdrawing a simple gold band. "I'm asking you to be my wife, to let me be Henry's father in every way that matters." Clara stared at the ring, overcome. This man, this good, kind man, was offering her everything she'd stopped allowing herself to dream of. A partner, a family, respect. "The town will talk," she whispered, one last token resistance. Vincent's smile was steady. "Let them. We'll be too busy being happy to notice." Clara looked toward the small alcove where Henry slept, then back to Vincent's hopeful face. "Yes," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Yes, I'll marry you." Vincent slipped the ring onto her finger, then gathered her into his arms. Their first kiss was gentle, a promise of tenderness to come. When they parted, both were smiling through tears. Outside, the blizzard continued to rage, but within Clara's small rooms, a different kind of storm had passed, leaving in its wake the clear, bright promise of a new beginning. They married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church. Reverend Hollister officiated, his earlier disapproval softened by Vincent's unwavering commitment and Clara's quiet dignity. Henry stood proudly between them, clutching a small wooden ring box Vincent had carved especially for the occasion. Not everyone approved, of course. Several prominent families stayed away, making their disapproval known through their absence. But more came than Clara had dared hope. Mrs. Reynolds and her husband, the livery owner and his family, even Thaddeus Morgan's mother, who surprised everyone by embracing Clara after the ceremony. "It takes courage to start over," the older woman had whispered. "God bless you for finding yours." The small reception was held at Mrs. Reynolds' boarding house, where Vincent had lived until the wedding. Tomorrow they would move into the small house he'd purchased on the edge of town, nothing grand, but solid, with a yard for Henry to play in and enough bedrooms for the family they hoped to build together. As twilight fell, Vincent found Clara standing alone on the porch, watching the sunset paint the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. "Happy, Mrs. Blackburn?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Her new name sent a thrill through Clara. "Very happy," she assured him, leaning back against his chest. "Though I keep expecting to wake up and find this was all a dream." Vincent chuckled, the sound rumbling through her. "If it's a dream, I'm having it too." He turned her gently to face him. "I have something for you. Another gift." Clara shook her head in mock exasperation. "You've already given me everything, Vincent." "Not quite everything," he replied mysteriously, taking her hand. "Come with me." He led her to the small stable behind the boarding house where a sleigh waited, hitched to Mrs. Reynolds' gentle bay mare. Piled in the sleigh were their few belongings along with Henry's sleeping form, bundled in blankets. "I thought we were staying here tonight," Clara said, confused. Vincent helped her into the sleigh, tucking a thick fur robe around her legs. "Change of plans," he said, eyes twinkling with secret delight. "I wanted our first night as a family to be in our own home." As he guided the sleigh through Lincoln's quiet streets, Clara felt a peace she hadn't known in years. The moon had risen, casting silver light across the snow, making the familiar town look magical and new. They passed the dress shop where she'd worked so hard to build a life for herself and Henry, the church where today they'd made their vows, the general store where she'd endured countless whispers and sidelong glances. None of that mattered now. The past was behind her, not forgotten, for it had shaped her into the woman she'd become, but no longer a burden she carried alone. Their house appeared ahead, a solid shadow against the starlit sky. Light glowed in the windows and smoke curled from the chimney. "Who?" Clara began, surprised. "Mrs. Reynolds' husband came ahead to start the fires," Vincent explained, bringing the sleigh to a gentle stop. "Didn't want you and Henry walking into a cold house." He lifted the still sleeping boy into his arms while Clara gathered their smaller bundles. As they approached the front door, Vincent paused, shifting Henry to one arm. "It's tradition," he said softly, "for a man to carry his bride across the threshold." Before Clara could respond, he'd swept her up alongside Henry, holding them both as if they weighed nothing at all. She laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck as he shouldered open the door and carried his new family into the warmth of their home. Inside, the house was simple but welcoming. A fire crackled in the main room's stone fireplace. Their few pieces of furniture, Clara's rocking chair, Vincent's trunk, the small table from her apartment, had been arranged to make the space feel lived in. Vincent carried Henry to the smaller of the two bedrooms, where a child-sized bed waited, covered in colorful quilts. Mrs. Reynolds had contributed to their new home. As Vincent gently settled the boy, Clara stood in the doorway, watching with a full heart. Henry stirred briefly, his eyes opening to slits. "Home," he murmured sleepily. "Yes, little man," Vincent answered, smoothing the boy's dark curls. "We're home." Henry smiled, already drifting back to sleep. "G-night, Papa." The word so casually offered, so profoundly meaningful, caught both adults by surprise. Vincent's hand stilled on Henry's head, and when he looked up at Clara, his eyes shone with unshed tears. "He called me Papa," he whispered, wonder and reverence in his voice. Clara nodded, unable to speak past the emotion clogging her throat. This moment, this simple, perfect moment, was everything she'd ever wanted for her son. Acceptance, belonging, love. Later, after they'd unpacked the essentials and shared a simple meal by the fire, Vincent led Clara to their bedroom. A large brass bed dominated the space, covered with fresh linens and more of Mrs. Reynolds' quilts. "When did you do all this?" Clara asked, running her hand over the smooth bedpost. Been working on it for weeks, Vincent admitted. Wanted everything to be ready. He hesitated, suddenly uncertain. Is it all right? Clara turned to him, her heart so full she thought it might burst. This man who had defended her when no one else would, who had brought bread and warmth into her life when she'd known only coldness, who had claimed her son as his own without hesitation, he was asking if a house and a bed and a future together were all right. It's perfect, she said, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. Everything is perfect. As snow began to fall outside their window, Clara and Vincent Blackburn discovered each other in the most intimate way, their bodies expressing what words could not: gratitude, wonder, commitment, and above all, love. In Vincent's gentle hands, Clara found healing for old wounds. In Clara's trusting surrender, Vincent found a home for his wandering heart. Spring came to Lincoln with its usual capricious nature, warm days followed by sudden frosts, mud everywhere as the winter's snow melted into the thirsty earth. The Blackburns settled into their new life together with fewer adjustments than might have been expected. Vincent continued his work at the livery stable, where his way with horses had earned him the position of head groom. Clara decided not to reopen her dress shop, focusing instead on creating a proper home for her family while taking in mending and special orders from her most loyal customers. Henry, now approaching his 3rd birthday, thrived under Vincent's care. The boy followed his new father everywhere, proudly carrying a miniature version of Vincent's tools as they worked together on small projects around the house. Clara often watched them from the window as they built birdhouses or repaired fence posts, Vincent's patient instruction and Henry's eager learning filling her with quiet joy. The town's attitude toward Clara had changed dramatically since her marriage. Those who had snubbed her before now nodded politely when they met her on the street. The same women who had once crossed to avoid walking near her now stopped to compliment Henry's growth or inquire after her health. Clara accepted their newfound cordiality with grace, neither dwelling on past hurts nor forgetting them entirely. One person who had not changed his opinion was Thaddeus Morgan. Though he kept his distance since Vincent's explanation of manners the previous fall, his resentment had only festered. Clara occasionally caught him watching her with undisguised hatred when she walked through town, but she did her best to ignore him, unwilling to let old animosities cast shadows on her new happiness. It was early May when Clara first suspected she might be carrying Vincent's child. The signs were familiar: the morning sickness, the tenderness, the bone-deep fatigue that overtook her by mid-afternoon. She waited a few weeks to be certain before sharing her suspicion with Vincent. They were sitting on the porch after dinner, watching Henry chase fireflies in the deepening twilight. The evening was warm, fragrant with lilacs from the bush Vincent had planted beside their front steps. "Vincent," Clara began, her voice soft with wonder, "I believe we're going to have a baby." His head turned sharply, eyes widening as he processed her words. "A baby, you're sure?" She nodded, a smile spreading across her face. "As sure as I can be this early. It would come around Christmas time, I think." Vincent let out a whoop of joy that startled Henry out of his firefly hunt. In one fluid motion, he swept Clara from her chair and into his arms, spinning her in a circle that had her laughing and protesting all at once. "Vincent Blackburn, put me down this instant. What will the neighbors think?" "That I'm the happiest man in Nebraska territory," he replied, setting her gently on her feet but keeping his arms around her waist. He bent to kiss her, a kiss filled with such tenderness that Clara's eyes grew misty. "What's happening?" Henry demanded, tugging at Vincent's leg. "Why is Mama crying?" Vincent crouched down, bringing himself to eye level with the boy. "These are happy tears, Henry," he explained. "Your mama just told me some wonderful news. You're going to be a big brother." Henry's face scrunched in confusion. "A brother? Where is he?" Clara laughed, kneeling beside them. "The baby is growing inside me, just like you did. It will be a while before he or she is ready to come out and meet us." Henry placed a tentative hand on Clara's still flat stomach. "In there? How did it get in there?" Vincent coughed suddenly, rising to his feet. That's a story for another day, buckaroo, but isn't it exciting? You'll have someone to teach things to, just like I teach you." The distraction worked perfectly. Henry's face lit up with the prospect of being the knowledgeable older brother. "I can show the baby my horse," he declared, referring to the wooden toy Vincent had carved for him. "And how to make mud pies. Those sound like excellent big brother things," Clara agreed, ruffling his hair. "Now, I think it's time for a certain young man to have his bath before bed." As Clara supervised Henry's bedtime routine, Vincent sat on the porch, contemplating the miracle that had become his life. A year ago, he'd been a solitary drifter, moving from job to job with nothing to show for his years but calloused hands and a collection of memories. Now he had a home, a wife who filled his days with purpose and his nights with tenderness, a son who looked at him with trust and admiration, and another child on the way. It was more than he'd ever allowed himself to hope for, more than he'd ever believed he deserved. When Clara rejoined him after settling Henry, Vincent pulled her gently onto his lap, one hand coming to rest protectively over her abdomen. "Thank you," he whispered against her hair. Clara leaned into his embrace. "For what? For this? For everything." He tightened his arms around her. "I never thought I'd have a family of my own." Clara turned to face him, her expression serious. "You're a good father to Henry. You'll be a good father to this baby, too." "I hope so," Vincent replied, his usual confidence wavering slightly. "I didn't exactly have the best example growing up." Clara knew some of Vincent's history: his father's abandonment when he was 8, his mother's struggle to raise 3 boys alone until consumption took her when Vincent was 15. He rarely spoke of those difficult years, but Clara understood they had shaped him, driving his determination to be the father he'd never had. "You are nothing like your father," she assured him firmly. "You chose us, Vincent. You chose to love a child who wasn't yours by blood. That's the mark of a true father." He kissed her then, pouring into the gesture all the emotions he struggled to express with words. Clara responded with equal fervor, grateful beyond measure for this man who had changed her life with bread and warmth and unwavering love. As summer progressed, Clara's condition became increasingly apparent. Henry grew fascinated with her changing body, asking countless questions that sometimes left his parents struggling for age-appropriate answers. The community responded with gifts and well wishes. Women who had once shunned Clara now bringing her jars of preserves or offering advice on managing pregnancy in the summer heat. Vincent worried constantly, insisting Clara rest more and take on fewer responsibilities. She indulged his protectiveness to a point, understanding it came from love, but drew the line when he suggested hiring help for the housework. "We don't need to spend money on a housekeeper," she told him firmly. "I'm with child, Vincent, not invalid." Women have been managing households while carrying babies since the beginning of time. But when Vincent surprised her with a modern washing machine, a hand-cranked marvel that would save her hours of back-breaking labor over the washboard, Clara accepted the gift with grateful tears. It was typical of Vincent's thoughtfulness, anticipating needs she wouldn't have voiced herself. In late July, disaster struck Lincoln in the form of a lightning storm that set fire to 3 buildings on the main street, including the livery stable. Vincent worked through the night with other townsmen, forming a bucket brigade from the town well to combat the blaze. By morning, the fires were out, but the livery lay in ruins, along with the general store and the town's only restaurant. Vincent returned home exhausted and smoke-stained, collapsing onto their bed without even removing his boots. Clara helped him undress, washing the soot from his face and hands with gentle strokes. "Thank God you're safe," she murmured, noticing the angry red burns on his forearms where embers had fallen. "These need tending." Vincent winced as she applied salve to the burns. "We saved most of the horses," he said, his voice hoarse from smoke, "and no one was seriously hurt." "But the stable's gone, Clara. There's nothing left." The implications hung heavy between them. The stable had been Vincent's primary employment, providing the steady income that supported their growing family. With Clara's pregnancy advancing and winter not far off, the timing couldn't have been worse. "We'll manage," Clara said with more confidence than she felt. "Mr. Reynolds won't let the stable stay destroyed. He'll rebuild." Vincent nodded wearily. "Eventually, yes. But that could take months, especially with winter coming." He closed his eyes, exhaustion and worry etched in every line of his face. "I'll find other work, maybe help with the rebuilding itself." Clara wanted to offer more reassurance, but worry had taken root in her own heart. She was 5 months along now, the baby's movements becoming stronger each day. The thought of bringing a child into the world with their future so uncertain filled her with dread. As Vincent drifted into much-needed sleep, Clara sat beside him, one hand resting on her swollen abdomen. "We'll be all right," she whispered, unsure whether she was reassuring her husband, their unborn child, or herself. "We've faced worse than this." The fire proved to be a turning point for the Blackburn family, though not in the way either Clara or Vincent could have anticipated. 3 days after the disaster, as Vincent was helping clear debris from the livery site, Thaddeus Morgan approached him with an unexpected proposition. "Heard you're looking for work, Blackburn," Morgan said, maintaining a careful distance. Though not much older than Vincent, Thaddeus had inherited his father's banking business and considerable property around Lincoln. "I might have something for you." Vincent straightened, wiping sweat from his brow. The two men had maintained a frigid civility since Vincent's arrival in Lincoln, their mutual dislike thinly veiled beneath necessary social interactions. "What kind of something?" Vincent asked cautiously. "I've got 100 acres south of town," Morgan replied. "Been looking for someone to manage it, raise some cattle, maybe horses too. Place has good water, decent grazing land." He shrugged, affecting indifference. "Pays better than grooming other men's horses." Vincent studied the banker suspiciously. "Why offer it to me? We're hardly friends, Morgan." Thaddeus smiled thinly. "Business isn't about friendship. You know horses, you work hard, and word is you've got honest dealings. That's what I need in a ranch manager." His smile faded. "Besides, having you out of town most days would suit me fine." And there it was, the real motivation. Morgan wanted Vincent away from Lincoln, away from daily reminders of how Vincent had humiliated him by defending Clara. It was petty, but it didn't necessarily make the offer less genuine. "I'd need to discuss it with my wife," Vincent said after a moment's consideration. "And I'd want terms in writing." Morgan nodded. "Fair enough. Come by the bank tomorrow if you're interested." He turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing, Blackburn. The offer's for you, not her. I don't want that woman or her bastard on my property." Vincent's hands clenched into fists, his face darkening with rage. "That woman is my wife, and Henry is my son in every way that matters," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You do well to remember that if you want my labor." Morgan had the sense to step back, recognizing the line he'd crossed. "Just business, Blackburn. Take it or leave it." After Morgan departed, Vincent stood motionless, conflicted emotions warring within him. The offer was genuinely attractive. Managing a ranch would utilize his skills far better than stable work, and the higher pay would provide security for his growing family. But accepting meant dealing with Morgan, a man who continued to harbor contempt for Clara despite her changed circumstances. That evening, Vincent shared the unexpected offer with Clara as they sat at their kitchen table, Henry already tucked into bed. "A ranch manager," Clara repeated, turning the idea over in her mind. "That's more in line with what you did in Kansas, isn't it?" Vincent nodded. "It's what I know best. And the pay would be nearly double what I made at the livery." He reached across the table to take her hand. "But Morgan made it clear he doesn't want you or Henry at the property. And I don't trust his motives, Clara. Not completely." Clara squeezed his hand. "His motives don't matter if the opportunity is real," she said practically. "And why would Henry or I need to visit the ranch? Your work has always been separate from our home." Vincent sighed, running his free hand through his hair. "It feels wrong, taking employment from a man who's shown you such disrespect." "Vincent," Clara said gently, "we can't afford pride right now, not with the baby coming and winter after that." She placed her other hand on her rounded stomach. "If this is the best opportunity for our family, you should take it." Her selflessness, her willingness to set aside past hurts for their future security, only deepened Vincent's love for her. "Are you sure?" Clara nodded firmly. "I'm sure. Besides," she added with a small smile, "it might do Thaddeus Morgan some good to see what a real man's work looks like." Vincent laughed, tension easing from his shoulders. "I'll speak to him tomorrow, then. But I'll make one thing clear: he deals with you respectfully. Or I walk away, contract or no contract." True to his word, Vincent laid out his terms to Morgan the following day, insisting on proper respect for his family as a non-negotiable condition of his employment. To his surprise, Morgan agreed readily, even offering a small house on the property where Vincent could stay when work required late hours or early mornings. By August's end, Vincent had taken over management of the Morgan Ranch, quickly earning the respect of the few hands already working there. His experience with cattle drives proved invaluable as he assessed the existing stock and made plans for expansion. The work was demanding but satisfying, allowing Vincent to build something that could eventually support his family for years to come. For Clara, the arrangement brought mixed emotions. She was proud of Vincent's accomplishments and relieved by their improved financial situation, but she missed his daily presence. He rode out before dawn most mornings and often returned after Henry was asleep, particularly as he worked to prepare the ranch for winter. "I don't like sleeping without you," she confessed one rare evening when he'd made it home for dinner. Vincent pulled her close, his hand settling on the prominent curve of her belly. "It's temporary," he promised. "Just until I get things running smoothly. Then I can hire more help, delegate more." Clara nodded against his chest, trying to be patient. She understood the importance of establishing himself in this new position, of proving his worth to Morgan and securing their future. But as her pregnancy advanced, bringing increasing discomfort and occasional fears, she found herself longing for Vincent's steady presence more than ever. Henry, too, felt his father's absence keenly, often standing at the window watching for Vincent's return until Clara had to insist he come to bed. To compensate, Vincent devoted his Sundays entirely to his family, taking Henry fishing or teaching him to ride the gentle pony he'd brought home one Saturday evening. "Is this for me?" Henry had gasped, staring wide-eyed at the small brown pony tethered outside their house. "All yours," Vincent confirmed, lifting the boy onto the pony's back. His name is Copper, and he's just the right size for a young cowboy like you." As Clara watched her son's face transform with delight, she couldn't regret the decision they'd made, despite the challenges it brought. Vincent was building a legacy for their children, not just financial security, but a future filled with possibilities neither she nor Vincent had enjoyed in their own childhoods. November arrived with unseasonable warmth, a gift Clara appreciated as she entered the final weeks of her pregnancy. Her movements had slowed considerably, her body unwieldy as the baby grew. Mrs. Reynolds visited often, bringing meals and helping with household tasks that had become difficult for Clara to manage. "You're carrying low," the older woman observed during one such visit. "That means a boy in my experience," Clara smiled, shifting uncomfortably in her rocking chair. "Vincent says he doesn't care either way as long as the baby's healthy." "That's what all men say," Mrs. Reynolds replied with a knowing wink. "But they all secretly hope for sons to carry on their names." She patted Clara's hand. "Though your Vincent already has Henry for that." "Yes," Clara agreed softly. "He does." The simple acknowledgement warmed her heart. In the months since their marriage, Vincent had never once treated Henry as anything less than his own flesh and blood. He had legally adopted the boy shortly after their wedding, ensuring Henry would carry the Blackburn name regardless of what happened in the future. As Mrs. Reynolds prepared to leave, she paused at the door. "I almost forgot the news. The new doctor arrived yesterday, set up in the old Miller place on Elm Street." She lowered her voice confidentially. "A young man, but they say he studied back east. Proper medical training, not just apprenticeship like old Dr. Fletcher." Clara's interest piqued immediately. Her greatest fear about the coming birth had been the absence of skilled medical help in Lincoln. Dr. Fletcher had been adequate for minor ailments, but his advanced age and shaky hands made him less than ideal for delivering babies. "A real doctor," she murmured. "What providence." "Providence indeed," Mrs. Reynolds agreed. "Especially with your time so near. Vincent must be relieved." Clara nodded, though in truth Vincent knew nothing of the new doctor yet. He'd been away at the ranch for 3 days, overseeing the movement of cattle to winter pastures. She'd send word to him tomorrow, she decided. The news would ease his mind considerably, but fate had other plans. That night, as a sudden cold front swept across the plains, bringing the first real winter storm of the season, Clara awoke to sharp pains and the unmistakable sensation of water soaking the bed beneath her. "No," she gasped, clutching her abdomen as another contraction gripped her. "Not yet. Not tonight." The baby wasn't due for at least 2 more weeks, possibly 3. Vincent was at the ranch, likely snowed in by now, and Henry slept peacefully in his room, unaware that his mother faced a crisis. Clara forced herself to remain calm, focusing on practical steps. First, she needed help. Mrs. Reynolds lived closest, just 2 streets over. If Clara could get Henry there, the older woman could care for him while sending someone for the doctor and hopefully for Vincent as well. Gritting her teeth against another contraction, Clara made her way to Henry's room, gently shaking him awake. "Henry, sweetheart," she said, keeping her voice steady despite her pain. "I need you to be a big boy for Mama. The baby is coming and we need to go to Mrs. Reynolds' house." Henry blinked sleepily, confused by the late-night awakening. "Baby coming now, where's Papa?" "Papa's at the ranch," Clara explained, helping him into his warmest clothes. "He'll come as soon as he can. But right now, you need to be very brave and walk with me to Mrs. Reynolds. Can you do that?" Henry nodded solemnly, sensing the seriousness of the situation despite his young age. "I'll help you, Mama." Clara pulled on her own coat, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders for additional warmth. The wind howled outside, driving snow against the windows in furious gusts. It was madness to venture out in such weather, especially in her condition, but staying alone was an even greater risk. Taking Henry's small hand in hers, Clara stepped out into the storm, immediately gasping as the biting cold stole her breath. The snow had already accumulated to several inches, making each step treacherous. Henry pressed close to her side, his little face scrunched against the wind. They had made it perhaps halfway to Mrs. Reynolds' house when a particularly strong contraction doubled Clara over, forcing a cry from her lips. She grabbed at a fence post for support, breathing hard as the pain slowly receded. "Mama!" Henry's voice trembled with fear. "Mama, what's wrong?" Clara couldn't answer, already feeling another contraction building. Too close together, she thought dimly. The baby was coming faster than she'd expected. They wouldn't make it to Mrs. Reynolds. As panic threatened to overwhelm her, a figure materialized through the swirling snow, tall and broad-shouldered, moving with purpose despite the storm. "Clara," Vincent's voice cut through the wind. "Clara, what in God's name are you doing out here?" Relief flooded through her as Vincent reached them, his face etched with concern and confusion. "The baby," she gasped. "Vincent, the baby's coming." Without hesitation, Vincent scooped Henry up with one arm and supported Clara with the other, guiding them back toward their house. "I came home when the storm hit," he explained. "Couldn't find you, thought maybe you'd gone to a neighbor's before the worst hit." His voice tightened with barely controlled fear. "When I saw you out in this." "I was trying to reach Mrs. Reynolds," Clara said between labored breaths. "Need the doctor." They reached the house, Vincent quickly stoking the fire to life while settling Henry on the small sofa. "Stay right here, buckaroo," he instructed the boy. "I need to help your mama." In the bedroom, Vincent helped Clara out of her wet clothes and into a clean nightgown, his movements efficient despite the trembling of his hands. Another contraction seized her just as he finished, and she clutched at his arms, unable to suppress a moan of pain. "I'll go for the doctor," Vincent decided, his face pale with worry. "And Mrs. Reynolds, she'll know what to do until he gets here." Clara shook her head frantically. "No, don't leave us. The storm, it's too dangerous." She tightened her grip on his sleeve. "I need you here, Vincent, please." The fear in her voice penetrated his determination. Vincent swallowed hard, nodding. "All right, we'll do this together." He forced a smile he didn't feel. "Not like I haven't seen animals birth before." Clara gave a shaky laugh that turned into a groan as another contraction took hold. "Not quite. The same thing," she managed. "Close enough," Vincent replied with false confidence. "Let me get some water boiling and clean linens. Then I'll bring Henry in here. He can help keep you company while I prepare." As Vincent bustled about, gathering supplies and setting water to boil, Clara focused on her breathing, trying to recall what she'd learned during Henry's birth. That had been different, a hospital in St. Louis, with proper doctors and nurses. This primitive home birth in the middle of a blizzard terrified her more than she wanted to admit. The hours that followed tested both Clara's endurance and Vincent's nerve. The contractions grew increasingly intense, coming in waves that left Clara exhausted and Vincent feeling helpless. Henry fell asleep curled at the foot of the bed, waking occasionally to pat his mother's hand before drifting off again. By dawn, the storm had passed, pale winter sunlight filtering through frost-covered windows. Clara's labor had progressed steadily, and Vincent had overcome his initial squeamishness to become a calm, reassuring presence, wiping her brow and supporting her through each contraction. "You're doing wonderfully," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her damp forehead. "I'm so proud of you, Clara." She managed a tired smile, not much choice at this point. A particularly strong contraction hit then, different from the others. Clara felt an overwhelming urge to push, her body taking control of the process. "Vincent," she gasped. "It's time, the baby's coming now." What followed was a blur of pain and effort for Clara, and controlled panic for Vincent as he positioned himself to receive their child. Henry woke fully, wide-eyed but remarkably calm as Vincent instructed him to hold his mother's hand and tell her how brave she was. "Just like when Copper jumps the creek," Henry told Clara earnestly. "You have to be brave and hold on tight." The simple comparison from her son gave Clara the final surge of strength she needed. With a cry that seemed torn from her very soul, she gave one last tremendous push. "I see the head," Vincent exclaimed, his voice thick with emotion. "Clara, keep going, you're almost there." Moments later, a new cry joined the chorus, thin and indignant but strong. Vincent's hands, which had branded cattle and broken wild horses, now cradled the tiny, slippery form of his newborn daughter with infinite tenderness. "A girl," he said, his voice breaking. "Clara, we have a little girl." Clara collapsed against the pillows, tears streaming down her face as Vincent carefully placed the squalling infant on her chest. "Hello, little one," she whispered, counting fingers and toes with her gaze. "Welcome to the world." Henry peered at his new sister with undisguised curiosity. "She's very red," he observed seriously. Vincent laughed, the sound bordering on hysteria as the tension of the night finally broke. "All babies are red at first, son. She'll pink up soon enough." He stroked the infant's damp head, marveling at the perfection of her tiny features. "What shall we call her?" Clara looked up at her husband, seeing in his face all the love and wonder she felt in her own heart. "Evelyn," she said softly, "after your mother." Vincent's eyes filled with tears. "Evelyn Rose Blackburn," he agreed, adding his own mother's middle name. "Our Christmas miracle, a little early." As the new day brightened around them, the Blackburn family shared a moment of perfect contentment, Clara holding their daughter, Vincent beside them with his arm protectively around them both, and Henry solemnly promising to be the best big brother any baby ever had. Outside their window, Lincoln began to stir, smoke rising from chimneys as the town emerged from the season's first storm. None of its citizens yet knew of the night's drama in the Blackburn household, of the courage and love that had brought a new life safely into the world. That would come later, along with the doctor's belated visit, Mrs. Reynolds' effusive assistance, and the town's surprised but genuine congratulations. For now, it was enough to be together, whole and complete in the warmth of the home they had built with love. The years that followed brought both challenges and joys to the Blackburn family. Vincent's management of the Morgan Ranch proved so successful that by Evelyn's third birthday, Thaddeus Morgan offered him a partnership, an arrangement that would have seemed impossible in those early days when Morgan had sneered at Clara in the street. "I still don't like him," Vincent confided to Clara after signing the partnership agreement. "But he's a fair businessman, and this means security for us for the children." The children had indeed become the center of their world. Henry, now 8, had grown into a thoughtful boy with his mother's gentle nature and his adopted father's steady determination. He excelled at school and showed a natural affinity for horses that made Vincent proudly predict he'd be running the ranch someday. Evelyn, spirited and fearless at 3, was the image of her father with her blue eyes and stubborn chin. She followed Henry everywhere, determined to do everything her big brother did, from riding to reading to helping Vincent with ranch chores. And then there was Matthew, their surprise blessing, born 2 years after Evelyn. Still a toddler, he had Clara's dark curls and sweet disposition, content to play quietly while his siblings raced around him. They had moved to a larger house the previous year, a handsome 2-story home on the edge of Lincoln with a view of the prairie that stretched to the horizon. Clara had insisted on planting lilacs by the front porch, just as Vincent had done at their first home, and the fragrant blooms now framed the entrance like a welcoming embrace. Lincoln itself had grown and changed as well. The railroad had finally reached them, bringing new settlers, new businesses, and a general air of prosperity. The town that had once shunned Clara now pointed to her family as one of its success stories, though neither Clara nor Vincent put much stock in such fickle approval. What mattered to them was the life they'd built together, the family they'd created from threads that might have unraveled had fate not brought Vincent to Lincoln that spring morning, when Clara's window bore the marks of the town's cruelty. On the 10th anniversary of their meeting, Vincent surprised Clara with a special gift, a silver locket containing miniature portraits of their 3 children on one side and a small piece of bread, preserved and sealed in wax, on the other. "Bread?" Clara asked, touching the curious keepsake with gentle fingers. Vincent smiled, taking her hands in his. "From the first loaf I brought you," he explained. "Mrs. Reynolds kept a piece when I told her what I planned to do, said she knew even then that it meant something special." Clara's eyes filled with tears as she closed the locket and pressed it to her heart. "Our beginning. The best beginning I could have asked for," Vincent agreed, drawing her into his arms, "though not nearly as good as every day since." As twilight settled over the prairie, Vincent and Clara stood on their porch watching their children chase fireflies in the yard. Henry, tall and lanky, Evelyn with her wild braids flying, little Matthew toddling determinedly after them. "Did you ever imagine this?" Clara asked, leaning against her husband's solid strength. "That day when you found me cleaning egg off my window," Vincent's arm tightened around her waist. "Not specifically," he admitted, "but I knew even then that you were someone worth knowing, someone worth loving." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Best decision I ever made, bringing you that bread." Clara smiled, thinking of all the warmth and nourishment they'd provided each other in the decades since, not just physical sustenance, but the deeper nurturing of souls that had once been wounded and alone. "We've come a long way from that morning," she murmured. Vincent nodded, watching as Henry scooped up Matthew to help the toddler catch a particularly elusive firefly. "We have at that. But you know what I think, Clara?" "What's that?" His smile held all the love and certainty of their years together. "I think we're just getting started." As darkness deepened around them, Clara and Vincent Blackburn remained on their porch, arms entwined, watching over the family they'd built from what once seemed impossible beginnings, a testament to the transformative power of kindness offered when it was needed most, of bread shared and warmth given freely, of love that chose to see possibility where others saw only shame. In Lincoln, Nebraska territory, where a decade earlier a young woman had stood alone against the world's judgment, now stood a family strong, united, and bound by the simple miracle of having found each other when they needed it most.